Paid for every single thing. The venue deposit, the catering contract, the florist who charged me $4,000 just to arrange white peonies on tables I had never seen, the photographer, the videographer, the string quartet for the ceremony, the DJ for the reception, the wedding cake from that bakery downtown that required a 6-month waitlist and a $1,500 non-refundable booking fee, every single thing. And when my son called me 3 weeks before the wedding and said, "Dad, I need to talk to you about the seating arrangement," I thought he meant the head table. I thought he was going to ask me whether I wanted to sit next to his future father-in-law or closer to the dance floor. I did not expect him to say what he said. "Sandra's family thinks it would be better if you sat at table 14. I didn't know where table 14 was. I didn't know the layout of the venue well enough yet. I'd only been there once, for the initial walkthrough, 6 months prior. "Where is table 14? I asked. He paused. That pause lasted maybe 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, I already knew. "It's near the back," he said. "By the emergency exit." I was 63 years old. I had worked 31 years as a civil engineer for the county. I had raised my son alone after his mother passed when he was 11. I had coached his little league team. I had driven him to SAT prep on Saturday mornings. I had co-signed his first car loan, his apartment lease, and 2 years later, when that fell through, I had let him move back in with me for 14 months without charging him a single dollar in rent. And I was being asked to sit by the emergency exit at a wedding I was paying for. I said, "I'll think about it." I did not say what I was actually thinking. His name is Jason. He's 31 now. He was a quiet kid, serious, the kind of boy who color-coded his school notebooks and got upset if his desk wasn't organized before he started homework. I was proud of that. I thought it meant he had discipline. I thought it meant he had values. I met Sandra about a year and a half before the wedding. Jason brought her to Thanksgiving. She was polite in the way that people are polite when they're performing politeness. Smile in place, compliments given at exactly the right moments. A bottle of wine selected carefully enough to seem thoughtful, but not expensive enough to seem like she was trying too hard. Her father, a man named Glenn, came to Christmas that same year. Glenn ran an insurance brokerage in Scottsdale. He drove a new Escalade and talked about it within the first 15 minutes of being in my house. He shook my hand like he was testing the grip. He looked around my living room with the kind of look that people try to hide but can't quite manage. My house is not small. It is a 4-bedroom colonial in a good neighborhood outside Columbus. I bought it in 1998 and paid it off by 2019. It is not a mansion, but it is mine, fully and completely, and I have never owed a single dollar on it since the day I made the last mortgage payment. Glenn looked at my house and saw something that did not impress him. I noticed. I filed it away. I told myself I was being uncharitable. I was not being uncharitable. The engagement happened in April. Jason called me from Sandra's parents' house in Scottsdale. He sounded happy, genuinely happy, and I told him I was happy for him. I was. I wanted him to be happy. That has always been the one constant thing I have wanted for my son. Just that he be happy, and that he be treated well by the world. He asked me about the wedding budget 2 weeks later. I had savings. I had a pension coming from the county and a 401k I had been contributing to since I was 28. I was not reckless with money. I had never been reckless with anything, but this was my son's wedding, the only wedding he would presumably ever have, and so when he told me the number Sandra's family had in mind, I swallowed hard and I said, "I can do that." The number was $380,000. I want you to understand that I did not say yes immediately. I asked questions. I asked who was contributing from Sandra's side. Jason told me Glenn would be covering the rehearsal dinner and the honeymoon. Everything else, the ceremony, the reception, all of it was expected to come from me because, as Jason explained with some discomfort, Sandra's family feels like the bride's family shouldn't have to pay for the wedding itself. I pointed out that this was not how wedding tradition actually worked in America. That traditionally the bride's family covered the reception costs. Jason said, "Dad, can you just not make this difficult?" I said, "I'm not making anything difficult. I'm asking a reasonable question." He said Sandra was already stressed and that her mother was very involved and that it would mean a lot to him if I could just be flexible. I said I would think about it. Then I called my accountant. Then I looked at my savings. Then I spent one evening sitting in my kitchen with a legal pad, running numbers, and I decided that I could do it without compromising my retirement, as long as I stayed within the agreed budget and did not let costs expand beyond what we had discussed. I should have known that was the naive part. The costs expanded. Sandra wanted a different florist. The original florist, I was told, was not the right aesthetic. The new florist cost 60% more. The venue needed an additional room for a cocktail hour that had not been in the original plan. The catering company was asked to add a late-night snack station. The wedding cake became a 4-tier custom design instead of the 3-tier option I had approved. Each of these changes came through Jason. Each time he presented it as a small adjustment. Each time when I pointed out that the budget was expanding, he said some version of the same thing. Sandra really wants this, Dad. Can you just let her have it? By 6 weeks before the wedding, I had already paid out $312,000, and the final invoices had not yet come in. I was not angry. I want to be precise about this. I was not angry. I was watchful. There is a difference. Anger is hot and reactive. What I felt was more like the feeling I used to get on job sites when something in a structural plan didn't quite add up. A quiet, steady attention. The sense that I needed to look more carefully. I started looking more carefully. I started looking more carefully. The first thing I found was the insurance policy. I had taken out event insurance on the wedding standard practice for an event of that size and cost. What I had not known was that Jason had called the insurance company 2 weeks prior and attempted to change the named beneficiary on the policy from me to Glenn. The insurance company had flagged it because the original policyholder, me, had not authorized the change. They sent me a letter, a paper letter, to my home address. I almost threw it away with the rest of the mail before I read it carefully. I read it 3 times. Then I sat very still at my kitchen table for a long time. I did not call Jason. I did not call Sandra. I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia who had handled my estate planning 2 years earlier. I told her what I had found. She asked me to come in the following morning. I went in the following morning. Patricia is thorough and she is not given to alarm, which is what I appreciate about her. She listened to everything I told her. She asked me several questions, calm and methodical. Then she asked if I would be willing to authorize a more detailed look at some of the financial transactions connected to the wedding planning. I said yes. What she found over the next 10 days was not a small thing. Jason had established a joint account with Sandra 8 months prior. Nothing unusual about that for an engaged couple. What was unusual was that a portion of several payments I had made directly to wedding vendors had been redirected. Not all of it. Not in a way that would have been immediately obvious, but enough. One florist payment had been split, half to the actual florist, half to an account I did not recognize. Patricia traced it. The account was connected to Glenn's brokerage. A deposit I had made to the venue had a similar discrepancy. A small processing fee separately invoiced that I had approved without scrutinizing, paid to an LLC registered in Arizona 4 months before the wedding planning began. I want to be careful here about what I say and how I say it, because I am telling you the truth, and the truth deserves precision. I did not know at that point whether Jason understood what was happening, or whether he had been brought into it, or whether he was himself being used. That uncertainty was the hardest part. That uncertainty is what kept me from making any sudden moves. Patricia advised me to say nothing, to go to the wedding, to behave as though everything was normal. She was already in contact with a forensic accountant and had flagged the matter to a colleague who specialized in financial fraud. She also told me to make sure the event insurance remained in my name. I confirmed it. It was. So when Jason called me that Thursday, 3 days before the wedding, and said that Glenn felt it would be more appropriate if I did not give a speech at the reception, that Glenn would be giving the primary toast and that a second speech might disrupt the flow, I said, of course, whatever Sandra needs. And when Sandra's mother called me the following day to discuss, in a tone that I can only describe as pleasantly imperial, the fact that they had decided to seat me at table 14, to allow the immediate family more space near the front, I said, that sounds fine. I appreciate you letting me know. I did not say anything else. I spent that evening in my garage, where I keep a workbench and some tools and a mini fridge with cold beer. And I sat on a stool and I thought about my son at 11 years old, the week after his mother's funeral, when he had asked me if I was going to be okay. He had been 11 years old and grieving, and he had asked me if I was going to be okay. I had told him yes. I had meant it. I thought him yes, I had meant it. I thought about that for a long time. Then I went inside and I went to sleep. The morning of the wedding, I put on the suit I had bought specifically for the occasion. It was a charcoal wool suit from a tailor in downtown Columbus. I'd spent more on that suit than I had spent on anything I had worn in 15 years. Not because I was trying to impress anyone, because it was my son's wedding and I wanted to look like his father. I drove to the venue. a converted estate property about 40 minutes outside the city, the kind of place with a long gravel driveway lined with old oak trees. I had paid the venue deposit myself in person with a cashier's check on a Tuesday afternoon 9 months ago. The young man at the entrance gate checked his clipboard and found my name. He waved me through. I parked. I walked to the main entrance. A coordinator I had not met before stopped me near the door. She said, "Mr. Whitfield, can I ask you to wait here just a moment? My last name is Whitfield, Raymond Whitfield. I have had that name for 63 years and my father had it before me." I said, "Of course." I waited. After about 4 minutes, Jason came out. He was in his tuxedo. He looked handsome. He looked like a grown man. He looked, in that moment, like someone I had spent my entire adult life trying to protect. He said, "Dad, okay, so there's been a change." I said, "Tell me." He said that Glenn felt it would be better if I limited my involvement in the day's events to a supporting role. He said that Sandra was anxious and that having two sets of parental figures with different levels of involvement was creating tension. He said that they had arranged for me to be welcomed at the reception table 14, but that for the ceremony itself, it would be better if I waited in a separate room. A separate room for the ceremony. At a wedding I had paid $380,000 for. I looked at my son. I looked at him for a long moment. And in that moment I made a decision. Very quietly, the way I make all decisions. Not with heat, not with drama, but with the particular clarity that comes when you finally understand exactly what you are dealing with. I said, "Jason, I love you. I want you to know that." He looked uncertain. He said, "Dad." I said, "I need to make a phone call. Give me a few minutes." I walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat. I called Patricia. She answered on the second ring. She asked if I was ready. I told her I was. She said, "Then I'll make the calls." What happened in the next 2 hours I will tell you as plainly as I can. Patricia contacted the county clerk's office to formalize a legal hold on 3 transactions that her forensic accountant had identified as fraudulent. She contacted the insurance company to confirm that the event policy remained in my name and that no claims could be filed without my authorization. She also contacted a process server who had been on standby for 4 days. I walked back into the venue. The coordinator tried to redirect me to a side room. I told her politely but without room for negotiation that I was the primary event contractor on record for this venue and that I would be walking through the main hall. She stepped aside. I did not go to the ceremony. I did not want to disrupt that. Whatever was happening with the finances, I did not want to stand up in the middle of my son's wedding ceremony and make it about me. That was not who I was. I went to the reception hall. I found my seat at table 14, near the emergency exit, and I sat down. A centerpiece of white peonies, arranged by a florist whose invoice I had paid, sat in the middle of the table. They were beautiful flowers. I have always liked peonies. My wife grew them in the garden. I sat there and I waited. The ceremony finished. The guests filtered into the reception hall. Glenn and his wife were at the head table. Sandra was radiant, genuinely, and I felt the complicated sadness of that. That she was beautiful on her wedding day, and that beauty was real even in the middle of everything else that was also real. Jason found me at table 14 before the dinner service began. He crouched down next to my chair the way he used to do when he was small and wanted to talk to me while I was sitting at my desk. He said, "Dad, I'm sorry about earlier. I know this isn't ideal." I said, "It's okay." He said, "I want you to know that Sandra and I really appreciate everything you've done." I said, "I know." He squeezed my shoulder and went back to the head table. The dinner service began. The speeches happened. Glenn gave a long toast about Sandra's childhood. He told 3 anecdotes, all of them involving money in one form or another. The pony she had at age 8, the trip to Italy at 14, the car she had received for high school graduation. He was a man who measured love in receipts. Nobody called on me to speak. After the toasts, the dancing began. I ate my meal. The food was excellent. I have always been able to appreciate a good meal regardless of the circumstances. Somewhere around 9 o'clock, Patricia tested me 2 words. "They're here." I want to be clear that what happened next was not something I orchestrated as a performance. I did not want a scene. I did not plan for anyone to be humiliated in front of 200 wedding guests. That was not my intention, and it is not who I am. But Patricia had advised me that if we waited any longer to serve the legal documents, Len had a flight booked out of Columbus at 7 the following morning, and if he was out of state, it would complicate things considerably. The process server had a narrow window. The process server entered the reception hall during a song. Glenn was at the bar with two other men, laughing about something. The process server approached him quietly and calmly and handed him an envelope. Glenn took it the way people take things when they don't yet know what they're holding. Then he opened it. I was not watching him. I was aware of him the way you are aware of weather peripherally without staring. I was looking at the dance floor where Jason and Sandra were still in the first hour of their married life, moving in slow circles to a song I didn't recognize. I heard Glenn's voice rise. Not words, just tone. That particular pitch that men hit when they are suddenly afraid. Jason came to table 14 10 minutes later. He was not dancing anymore. His face had changed. The happiness had been replaced by something unformed, something that wasn't yet one clear emotion. He sat in the chair next to me. He said, "Dad, what is this?" I said, "What did Glenn tell you?" He said, "He said you're suing him. He said you're trying to destroy Sandra's family." I said, "I'm not suing anyone. I'm recovering money that was redirected from my accounts without my authorization." There was a silence. Jason said, "What?" I said, "The florist payment, the venue processing fee, three other transactions that Patricia has documented." Jason, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer me honestly. Did you know? He looked at me. His eyes were doing something complicated. He said, "I didn't. Dad, I didn't know the specifics. Glenn told me there were some accounting arrangements that would help with tax purposes and that it was standard in event financing. And I just..." He stopped. I waited. He said, "I just signed what he told me to sign." I had prepared myself for anger. I had not quite prepared myself for this. For the particular grief of watching my son realize, in his tuxedo on his wedding night, that he had been used too. I said, "Okay." He said, "Dad, I'm sorry." I said, "I know." We sat together at table 14 for a few minutes without speaking. The music was still playing. The other guests didn't fully understand yet what was happening, only that something at the bar had shifted the atmosphere. Sandra was standing near the head table looking toward us with an expression I couldn't read from that distance. I said, "Jason, I need you to understand something. What is documented is real. The money that was moved is real. Patricia is going to pursue it regardless of what happens tonight. That's not something I can or want to stop." He nodded. I said, "And I also need you to understand that none of it changes the fact that you are my son and that I love you." He put his face in his hands. Glenn left the reception before 10 o'clock. His wife followed. Sandra went with them, still in her wedding dress, and a small group of their guests filtered out behind them in the way guests do when the people they came for have departed. Jason stayed. He sat at table 14 for a while, and then he moved to the bar, and then at some point one of his friends from college found him, and they went outside together. I stayed until the venue staff began to break down the table decorations. I thanked the coordinator, the same woman who had tried to redirect me earlier. She was young and clearly unsure of what had transpired, and I didn't feel any need to explain it to her. I thanked her for the evening, and I meant it. She had done her job well. I drove home on empty roads. It was a cool night for early October, and I kept the windows down. I don't listen to music when I'm processing something. I prefer the sound of moving air. I thought about my son at table 14 in his tuxedo with his face in his hands. I thought about the 4-tier wedding cake that I had paid for and that I had not seen anyone eat. I thought about Patricia, who would be in her office the following morning, methodical and thorough, working through documents that would determine what happened next in courtrooms and county records. I thought about the night my wife died. I thought about Jason at 11, asking me if I was going to be okay. I had told him yes. I had meant it. Here is what I know now, 3 months out. Patricia recovered $226,000 of the redirected funds. The remainder is still being pursued. Len's brokerage is under review by the State Insurance Commission. No criminal charges have been filed yet. But Patricia tells me that remains a possibility depending on what the forensic accountant's final report shows. Jason and Sandra are still married. I did not expect otherwise, and I did not want otherwise. Whatever happened between their families in the accounting of that night, my son made a commitment to that woman in front of 200 people, and I believe commitments are worth honoring, even difficult ones. Jason came to see me about 3 weeks after the wedding. He came alone. He sat at my kitchen table in the same chair. He sat in as a boy doing homework, and he told me things about the months of wedding planning that I had not known. conversations Glenn had had with him about protecting the family's financial interests, documents described to him as routine, pressure applied so gradually that he hadn't recognized it as pressure, until I named it at table 14. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "You should have called me when you didn't understand something." He said, "I know." I said, "I'm not a man who needs to be impressed. I never needed a $380,000 wedding to feel good about being your father. You know that." He said, "I know, Dad." I said, "Then know it going forward." We had coffee. His mother used to make coffee too strong, and I inherited the habit from her, and Jason has always complained about it, and he complained about it that morning too, and that felt like something, that small, ordinary complaint felt like something worth holding on to. He left around noon. I washed the coffee cups. I went out to the garage. I sat on my stool at the workbench. I did not feel victorious. I want to be precise about this, the way I want to be precise about everything. I did not feel victorious, and I did not feel victorious, and I did not feel destroyed. I felt like a man who had been tested in the particular way that life tests you when you are not prepared for the test. Not with warning, not with ceremony, just suddenly and completely in a charcoal wool suit, at a table near the emergency exit, with peonies in the center and the sound of a wedding playing out in a room where I had been made to feel like I did not belong. I had paid for every petal of those flowers, and I had sat there quietly, and I had made one phone call, and I had eaten my meal, and I had told my son I loved him, and I had driven home on empty roads with the windows down. That is the whole of it. That is enough. I have been thinking, in the month since that October evening, about what it actually means to raise a child well, not perfectly, not without mistakes, but well, meaning with intention, with honesty, with the understanding that what you model for them every single day becomes, eventually, the architecture of how they move through the world. I did not raise Jason to be dishonest, I know that, and I do not believe he is, at his core, a dishonest person. What I believe is that he was young and in love, and that someone older and more practiced at manipulation found the seam in that and applied pressure at exactly the right moment. That happens. It has happened to people far more experienced than a 31-year-old man planning his first wedding. But here is what I keep coming back to. He signed things he didn't understand. He nodded at explanations that didn't fully make sense to him. He chose the easier path in a dozen small moments, because the harder path, calling me, asking questions, saying, "I don't understand this, can we slow down?" would have created friction with the people he was trying to please. That is not a character failure. That is what happens when a person has not yet fully learned that the integrity is worth more than the discomfort of a difficult conversation. I did not learn that lesson easily myself. I learned it over decades, through work, through loss, through the particular education that comes from making decisions that had real consequences and living with all of them. My wife used to say that I was the most stubborn man she had ever met, and she meant it as a criticism, but looking back, I think she was also, at least partly, describing something that kept me standing when other things fell. Stubbornness, when it is pointed at the right things, is just another word for resolve. What I tried to pass on to Jason in that kitchen conversation 3 weeks after the wedding was not anger and not blame. What I tried to pass on was simpler than that. The idea that a man who understands his own values does not need to perform them. He does not need to explain them or defend them loudly. He simply acts from them, quietly and consistently, and over time those actions become a record that speaks for itself. Len's record spoke for itself too. That is the part that requires no embellishment. The money moved, the documents existed, the forensic accountant found what he found, and the consequences that followed were the natural result of choices made in sequence over many months. I did not manufacture that outcome. I only refused to look away from it. There is something clarifying about that, about refusing to look away. I spent too many months interpreting Glenn's behavior charitably, telling myself I was being uncharitable, choosing the generous explanation when the evidence was beginning to suggest otherwise. That cost me time and it cost me money. It did not cost me my self-respect because I never pretended not to see what I eventually saw. I only delayed acting on it. Delay is human. Paralysis is something else. I am glad I did not stay paralyzed. Jason is figuring out, in his own time and his own way, what kind of man he intends to be. I cannot do that work for him. I could not do it when he was 11 and I cannot do it now. What I can do is remain someone worth coming to, someone at a kitchen table with strong coffee and no performance and nothing to prove. That table has always been open. It still is.